Hey everyone, and welcome to AK Virtual Maths. If you are gearing up to completely conquer your IGCSE Physics syllabus, you've landed in exactly the right place. Today, we're bringing you a highly dynamic survival guide designed to decode and master Section 1.1 of your physics journey. We're going to be transforming the essential rules, tools, and kind of mind-bending concepts of physics into a really streamlined explainer that will perfectly equip you for exam success. So, grab your notebooks, get focused, and let's unlock the secrets of the physical universe. Here is our game plan for this explainer. First, a quick welcome to IGCSE Physics, then measuring length and time, followed by average values and pendulums. After that, we dive into scalars versus vectors, finding resultant vectors, and we will wrap it all up with some exam practice and an outro. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1. Welcome to IGCSE Physics, mapping your path to success. So, right off the bat, you've got to know your path, because the Cambridge IGCSE is actually split into two completely different routes. If you're taking the core syllabus, you're going to tackle papers 1 and 3 alongside a practical paper, and that sets you up for grades C through G. But if you're aiming for those top-tier ranks and taking the extended path, you'll be digesting both the core and the supplement content. That means you'll face papers 2 and 4, which unlocks your ability to hit those coveted A-star grades. Knowing which path you're on dictates exactly how deep you need to go into the math that we're going to cover later today. Moving right along, Section 2 is all about measuring length and time and equipping your scientific tools. You know, humans have literally been measuring things for thousands of years. It's super easy to just write off ancient civilizations as having basic tools, like the ancient Egyptian cubit rod, which was literally just a piece of granite based on the length of a forearm. But brilliant minds like Eratosthenes used those very simple tools along with shadows and a healthy dose of geometry to calculate the circumference of the entire Earth way back in 300 BCE. So absolute precision and care, even with simple tools, can yield massive results. Now, fast forward to a modern lab, and we obviously have a few more options than a block of granite. The crucial takeaway here is that you must select the instrument that's precise enough for your specific task. We use rulers for length, right? And measuring cylinders for volume. But when it comes to measuring time, it is all about the scale of the event. A standard stopwatch is perfectly fine for timing a swinging pendulum. But what if you're trying to measure the speed of sound? You are definitely going to need a digital clock that measures in milliseconds, which is usually triggered by a microphone. And for rapid, continuous motion, we have to bring out the ticker tape timers or data loggers. If you try using a stopwatch to time a speeding car over a really short distance, human reaction errors are going to completely ruin your data. This stack contains 500 sheets of paper. You cannot measure it directly with any accuracy. Instead, we use the multiples trick. By measuring the height of the entire 500-sheet stack at once, we create a measurement large enough for our ruler to handle. To get an accurate reading, avoid parallax error. If your eye is at an angle, the markings will appear to shift. Always look at the ruler from a perpendicular 90-degree angle. If the total stack is 50 millimeters, we divide that height by the 500 sheets to find that each individual page is exactly 0.1 millimeters thick. By measuring multiples, you turn a basic classroom ruler into a tool capable of recording sub-millimeter precision. Geometric formulas only work for regular shapes like cubes. This is the physical reality of displacement. In the lab, we are constantly quantifying how matter occupies space and changes over time. For an irregular object like a jagged rock, we use the volume of water it displaces. This requires a precise reading of the measuring cylinder. As seen here, you must bend down so your eyes are perfectly horizontal with the water's surface to prevent another parallax trap. Water forms a curve called a meniscus. Your measurement must be taken from the exact bottom of that curve to record your initial volume. Now submerge the irregular solid. The water level rises to a new, higher volume, which we record immediately. Subtract the initial volume from the final volume to isolate the object's true volume. Record this to the same number of decimal places allowed by your cylinder's precision. Displacement works because a fluid conforms to any shape, allowing it to act as a physical map of even the most complex irregular geometry. Okay, Section 3, average values and pendulums. Let's enter the training simulator. Safety begins with your workspace. Because pendulum stands are top-heavy, they are prone to tipping. You must use a C-clamp to secure the stand firmly to the desk before you begin. Let's actually see how this builds a completely foolproof experimental method. In step 1, when you're measuring the length of a pendulum string with your ruler, You have to measure all the way to the center of the mass, which we call the bob. Step 2 is exactly where we beat that human error I just mentioned. Instead of trying to frantically start and stop your watch for just one quick swing, you time 10 or even better, 20 complete oscillations. Finally, for step 3, you just divide that total time by the number of swings. Doing this calculation gives you the exact average time period for just one swing, drastically shrinking the impact of your thumb being a fraction of a second too slow on the stopwatch. It's a total game changer.
We measure the time period of a simple pendulum. We pull the bob back to a narrow angle, ensuring the string remains taut before a gentle release. A complete oscillation describes the entire round trip, starting at point A, swinging through the arc to point B, and returning exactly to its starting position. Timing a single swing is highly inaccurate because human reaction time, the delay in pressing the stopwatch button, is a significant fraction of the total time. This digital display shows precision down to 1/100th of a second. A stopwatch is far more precise than our human reflexes, so we have to adjust our method to compensate. We apply the multiples trick to time. Start the clock and count 20 full round-trip oscillations before stopping it. Divide that total time by 20 to find the period of one swing. Round your final answer so its significant figures match the 100th of a second precision of your digital timer. By timing 20 events instead of one, you divide your reaction error by 20, effectively eliminating its impact on your final recorded data. Now we set up a live data table. Every column header needs two things: the name of the quantity being measured and its specific unit, separated by a /. Once the headers are set, units are never written inside the cells alongside the numbers. Keeping the cells strictly numerical makes your data much easier to process. This standardized format ensures that your readings remain organized and clear, even when you scale up your data for more advanced experiments. The result is a perfectly formatted data table. The headers are clear, the cells are numerical, and every reading reflects the true precision of the instruments. You've successfully measured microscopic thickness, recorded complex irregular volumes, and rapid swing periods by systematically avoiding parallax and timing errors. You successfully maintained a safe, stable environment by keeping your heavy equipment securely anchored throughout the entire process. These repeatable techniques provide the reliable data needed to test more complex physical laws in the future. Your table is set and your station is ready.
When you run this experiment, look at how these variables relate to each other. With a short string of just 0.20 meters, 20 swings take about 18.1 seconds. But as we move down the table and increase the length of the string to 0.80 meters, the time jumps significantly up to 39.4 seconds. This data clearly, mathematically proves that increasing the length of the pendulum directly increases its time period. Let's dive into Section 4, Scalars versus Vectors, the physics mindbender. Okay, so this is absolutely crucial. This is one of the most vital rules of the universe. A vector is a physical quantity that requires both its size, which we actually call magnitude in physics, and its direction to be completely described. Think about it this way. If someone tells you to walk 10 meters, that's totally fine if you're in an empty field. But if you are standing right next to a steep cliff, walk 10 meters is a terrible instruction. Direction literally is the difference between safety and total disaster. And that, my friends, is exactly why vectors exist. There's a really massive conceptual divide you need to memorize here. Think about scalars, things like time, mass, energy, and temperature. It simply doesn't make any sense to say, hey, the mass is 10 kilograms north. It's just 10 kilograms, right? But vectors like velocity and force demand a specific direction. Speed is just going 50 miles per hour, but velocity is going 50 miles per hour due east. Knowing exactly which category a quantity falls into is a massive key to unlocking your exam questions. Knowing a car is traveling at 60 miles per hour tells you how fast it's moving, but it provides no information on where it will end up. To predict its actual destination, you have to know its direction. This gives us two distinct categories for physical quantities. On the left side of our screen, we have scalars. A scalar is a quantity that only has magnitude, which is just another term for size. Things like distance, speed, time, mass, energy, and temperature are all completely described by a single number. On the right, we have vectors. A vector is a quantity that must have both magnitude and a specific direction. Force, weight, velocity, acceleration, momentum, and field strength
all require you to state the specific line of action they are moving along. Notice where mass and weight sit. Mass is a scalar. It is simply the amount of matter in an object. Weight is a vector. It is the actual gravitational force pulling that mass downwards.
Section 5, Finding Resultant Vectors. Time to conquer the boss fight.
If you leave out the directional component when working with a vector, your physical calculations will simply fail to match reality. An object experiences two velocities at right angles, 12 meters per second horizontally and 5 vertically. To find its true path, we construct a rectangle. The actual movement is the resultant vector, the diagonal drawn from the starting point. Finding this resultant vector requires calculating two distinct answers, its exact size and its precise angle. Forming a right-angled triangle lets us use the Pythagorean theorem. The resultant magnitude is the square root of 12 squared plus 5 squared, giving 13 meters per second. For direction, the inverse tangent of 5 over 12 reveals an angle of 22.6 degrees. When forces or velocities intersect at 90 degrees, right triangle geometry maps exactly where the object goes. Alternatively, use the graphical method. Set a scale. 1 centimeter equals 1 meter per second. Draw the 12 and 5 centimeter velocities at 90 degrees, then complete the rectangle and diagonal. A ruler measures the 13 centimeter resultant, and a protractor confirms the 23-degree angle. Pause and find the resultant magnitude and direction of 3.0 and 4.0 newtons at 90 degrees. Equations and scale drawings are both completely valid tools that lead to the exact same answer. If you worked the problem, your resultant magnitude should be 5.0 newtons at an angle of 53 degrees from the 3 Newton force. We verify this with math. 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 25. The square root of 25 confirms the 5 Newton magnitude. Scalars have only magnitude, while vectors possess magnitude and direction. To combine perpendicular vectors, you have two paths. You can use the Pythagorean and inverse tangent formulas, or follow the graphical method. Choose a scale, draw at 90 degrees, complete the rectangle, and measure. To master vector physics, you must always account for the angle.
Now, for those of you on the extended syllabus path who are aiming for those top grades, I need you to pay really close attention here. Because vectors have a direction, you can't just add them together with normal, everyday math if they're pointing in different weights. If two vectors, let's say two forces, are acting at right angles to each other, you actually have to use the magic of right-angled triangles to find their combined effect, which we call the resultant. To find the overall magnitude, we'll use the Pythagoras formula. The resultant force squared equals the x force squared plus the y force squared. And to find the exact angle, or the direction, well, that's where trigonometry steps in, specifically using the tangent function.
But hey, what if you're more of a visual person and prefer drawing over algebra? Let's break down the graphical method. Step 1. Choose a scale. For example, let's say 1 centimeter on your paper equals 1 Newton of force. Step 2. Carefully draw your two vectors perfectly at right angles. Let's say 3 newtons across and 4 newtons up. Step 3. You just complete the rectangle by drawing in some dashed lines. And finally, step 4. Draw a diagonal line right from your starting point to the opposite corner. That line right there is your resultant vector. If you take a ruler and measure it, you'll find it's exactly 5 centimeters long, meaning your resultant force is 5 newtons. You combine a 3 and a 4, and purely because of their directions, you get a 5. That is literally vector magic in action.
All right, we made it to section 6, exam practice and outro. Let's test your skills. Let's actually put this to the test with an authentic exam question. The question asks, a student investigates a pendulum. Why did the student record the time for 20 swings instead of just 1? Think back to our virtual lab simulator from earlier. What did we say about that stopwatch? The correct answer is to reduce human reaction time error. By taking the total time for 20 swings and dividing it by 20, you calculate a much more precise average, which smoothly irons out any of those tiny mistakes you make when physically clicking the start or stop buttons. You absolutely crushed it today. If this explainer helped clear up any of your physics fog, I want you to officially join the AK Virtual Math community. Drop a like on this explainer, hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming IGCSE guides, and be sure to share this with your study group. Most importantly, if you have any lingering physics doubts about vectors, pendulums, or anything else we covered, drop them down in the comments below so we can jump in and help you out. As we wrap things up today, I want to leave you with this final thought. At its absolute core, The entire physical universe boils down to just magnitudes and directions. And you now have the exact tools to measure them, average them out, and even combine them. So the only question left for you is, where will your vector take you on your next learning adventure? Keep studying smart, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.